Johnny Carson made America laugh for 30 years. But on the night he died, he wasn't laughing. He was apologizing. And the person he was apologizing to had been dead for over a decade. January 23, 2005. While the world slept peacefully, the king of late-night television lay dying in his Malibu mansion. No cameras, no audience, no applause. Just one woman sitting beside him, a hospice nurse named Margaret who had witnessed something that night she has never forgotten. For 20 years, she kept silent. She signed the papers. She honored the family's wishes. But what Johnny Carson confessed in those final hours was too important to bury forever. Because it wasn't about television. It wasn't about fame. It was about a secret Johnny carried for 50 years. A wound so deep that even 30 years of standing ovations couldn't heal it. You see, the man America fell in love with every night wasn't real. Johnny Carson was a character, a mask, a performance so convincing that even his own children didn't know who their father really was. Behind that iconic smile was someone else entirely. A shy, stuttering boy from Nebraska named John Carson, who believed until his very last breath that he was never good enough. That night, as old Tonight Show episodes played on the television in his bedroom, Johnny did something extraordinary. He started talking to himself, not to Margaret, not to God, to the younger version of himself on that screen. And what he said, the confession that poured out of him will change everything you think you know about fame, success, and what it really costs to be loved by millions. But here's what nobody expected. Johnny's final words weren't for America. They were for one person, someone he had failed, someone he never got to say goodbye to. If you're watching this, stay with me until the end. Like this video right now and tell me in the comments where are you watching from tonight. The sun had already set over the Pacific Ocean when Margaret arrived at Johnny's Malibu estate that evening. She had been caring for him for 3 months now, watching the legendary entertainer fade a little more each day. Emphysema had ravaged his lungs from decades of smoking. His heart was failing. The doctors had been clear. It was only a matter of time, but Johnny Carson wasn't afraid of dying. He had told Margaret that weeks ago. What terrified him was something else entirely, something he had never admitted to anyone. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand what had already broken Johnny Carson years before his body gave out. In 1991, his son Ricky was killed in a car accident. Johnny never recovered. Friends said the light went out of his eyes that day. He retired from The Tonight Show a year later, and for the next 13 years he became a ghost. He played golf. He sailed his yacht. He avoided the public. He waited. But there was another wound older and deeper than losing Ricky. His mother, Ruth Carson, a woman who never once told her son she was proud of him. Johnny had spent his entire career chasing her approval. 30 years of Emmy Awards, of presidential interviews, of being called the greatest entertainer of his generation, and Ruth Carson never cracked a smile. She died without ever saying the words Johnny desperately needed to hear. When Margaret entered his bedroom that evening, she found Johnny propped up against his pillows, oxygen tubes in his nose, his eyes fixed on the television. An old episode of The Tonight Show was playing. A young, vibrant Johnny Carson was delivering his monologue, the audience roaring with laughter. But old Johnny wasn't laughing. He was crying. Margaret moved closer. She had seen many patients in their final hours, but something about this felt different. Johnny's tears weren't from pain. They were from something much deeper. "Mr. Carson," she said softly, "can I get you anything?" Johnny didn't answer. He just kept staring at the screen, at the younger version of himself, and whispered something that made Margaret's blood run cold. "I've been waiting my whole life to tell him the truth. And tonight, I finally can." Margaret didn't understand. Not yet. But she was about to witness something she would carry with her forever. Margaret pulled a chair beside Johnny's bed and sat down. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of the television where young Johnny Carson was taking his final bow from a 1992 broadcast. The audience was on their feet. The applause was deafening. It was the end of an era. Old Johnny watched with hollow eyes. "Would you like me to change the channel?" Margaret asked gently. Johnny shook his head slowly. "No, I need to see him. I need to remember who I was supposed to be." Margaret paused. "Supposed to be. Johnny let out a breath that rattled in his chest. That man on the screen. That's not me. That was never me. He pointed a trembling finger at the television. That's Johnny Carson, America's friend, the king of late night, the man who made everyone feel like they belonged. He lowered his hand. But I'm not him. I never was. Margaret leaned closer, confused but captivated. I don't understand, Mr. Carson. Johnny turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something behind his famous eyes. Not charm, not wit, just exhaustion. Decades of exhaustion. My real name is John William Carson. I was born in Corning, Iowa, and raised in Norfolk, Nebraska. I was shy. I stuttered. I couldn't look people in the eye. My own mother thought I was a disappointment. He paused, gathering strength. So, I created someone else, someone confident, someone funny, someone people would love. I called him Johnny Carson, and I spent 60 years pretending to be him. On the television, young Johnny was waving goodbye, that iconic smile lighting up the screen. Old Johnny watched himself and shook his head. They loved him, Johnny whispered. 50 million people every night. They loved Johnny Carson. But nobody ever loved John Carson. Not even my own mother. Not even me. Margaret felt tears forming in her eyes. She had cared for famous people before, athletes, politicians, actors, but she had never heard anyone speak with such brutal honesty about their own life. Mr. Carson, she said carefully, your children love you. Your fans adore you. You brought so much joy to the world. Johnny smiled, but it wasn't the smile America knew. It was sad, broken. They love a character, sweetheart. A performance. If they knew the real me, the scared kid hiding behind the jokes, they would have changed the channel a long time ago. The show went to commercial. Young Johnny's face froze on the screen. Mid-laugh, frozen in time. Old Johnny stared at that image and whispered something that made Margaret's heart stop. I have to tell him something before I go. I have to tell him what I should have said 50 years ago. Stay with me. This story is just getting started. Drop a like if you're still watching and comment below. What country are you tuning in from right now? The commercial ended. Young Johnny returned to the screen, launching into another segment, charming the audience with effortless wit. But old Johnny wasn't watching anymore. He was speaking directly to the television, directly to his younger self. Look at you, Johnny whispered, his voice cracking. So smooth, so confident, everyone's best friend. You think you figured it out, don't you? The fame, the money, the women throwing themselves at you, the president's calling you for advice. He paused, struggling for breath. You're a fool. Margaret sat frozen, watching this dying man confront the ghost of his youth. You're going to lose everything that matters, Johnny continued. Not the career. You'll keep that. Not the awards. They'll pile up until you run out of shelf space. But everything real, everyone who actually matters, gone. For marriages, for failures. 3 sons who grew up wondering why their father loved strangers more than them. Johnny's hands were shaking now. And you want to know your biggest regret? The one that's going to haunt you until your very last breath. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. June 21st, 1991. Remember that day you were in your office preparing for a meeting with NBC executives? Your son Ricky called. He said he needed to talk to you. He said it was important. Tears streamed down Johnny's face and you told him you were busy. You told him you'd call him back tomorrow. Tomorrow. Johnny's voice broke completely. But there was no tomorrow because the next day Ricky was dead. A car accident on a California highway and you never found out what he wanted to tell you. You chose a network meeting over your own son and now you get to die with that. Margaret was sobbing quietly. She had never witnessed anything like this, a man confronting his own failures with such devastating clarity. But Johnny wasn't finished. You think the applause fills the emptiness. It doesn't. You think the fame makes you worthy. It doesn't. You spent 30 years making 50 million people laugh. And you couldn't make your own mother smile. Not once. Ruth Carson went to her grave without ever telling you she was proud. And you know why? Because she saw through you. She knew Johnny Carson was fake. She knew her son was still that scared little boy from Nebraska hiding behind a microphone. Johnny looked directly at the television, at his younger self, frozen in a promotional shot. I became you because John Carnassi wasn't enough. He stuttered. He was awkward. He was afraid. So I killed him. I buried him under 1,000 monologues and 1,000,000 jokes. And now at the end of everything, I realized the truth. He took a long labored breath. John Carnassi was the only real thing about me, and I destroyed him for applause, for approval, for a mother who never clapped. The show came back on. Young Johnny was laughing with a guest, the audience eating out of his hand. Old Johnny watched and shook his head slowly. And the worst part, I would do it all again. Every broken marriage, every missed birthday, every phone call I never returned because I was addicted not to drugs, not to alcohol, to the sound of people laughing, to the feeling of being wanted, even if it was fake, even if they didn't know my real name. He turned to Margaret, his eyes red and swollen. That's the truth no one ever heard. Johnny Carson was a lie, and the lie killed everything I ever loved. The hours crawled by. Outside, the Pacific Ocean churned in the darkness. Inside, Johnny Carson was fading. By midnight, his breathing had become shallow and irregular. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the oxygen machine was working harder than ever. Margaret checked his vitals and knew. She had seen this before. The body beginning to let go, the spirit preparing to leave. But Johnny wasn't ready to stop talking. Throughout the night, as old Tonight Show episodes played on the television, he shared pieces of his life that no interviewer had ever heard. That time I had Sinatra on, he showed up drunk, almost threw a punch at me backstage because I made a joke about his tooth. Johnny smiled weakly. We laughed about it later, but that's how it always was. Everyone performing, everyone pretending, nobody real. Another episode, another memory. That emotional farewell show in '92. Everyone thought I was crying because I'd missed the audience. He shook his head. I was crying because I knew I'd wasted my life, 30 years behind a desk, and I didn't know my own sons. I couldn't name their friends. I didn't know their dreams. I was America's dad, and I was a stranger to my own children. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, an episode aired that stopped Johnny cold. It was a segment where young Johnny was interviewing a child, a little boy, who had written him a fan letter. Young Johnny was patient, warm, genuinely interested. He made that nervous kid feel like the most important person in the world. Old Johnny watched this and broke down completely. That's who I should have been, he sobbed. With my sons, with everyone who actually mattered. But I gave all my patience to strangers. My own kids got the tired version, the distracted version, the version who wanted to be anywhere else. Margaret took his hand. Mr. Carson, please let me call your family. They should be here. Johnny squeezed her hand weakly. No, I've already said my goodbyes. Letters, each of them. They'll find them after. I don't want them to watch this. He gestured at his failing body. Let them remember Johnny Carson. Not this. But you shouldn't be alone. Johnny looked at her with those famous blue eyes now clouded. With exhaustion and tears. I've been alone my whole life, sweetheart. Even in a room full of people. Even with the whole country watching. John Carnast was always alone. This is just the first time. It's honest. The clock on the wall ticked toward 4 o'clock in the morning. Johnny's breathing slowed. His eyes grew heavy, but he forced himself to stay awake. There's one more thing, he whispered. One more thing I need to say, and I need you to remember it. Promise me. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. I promise. We're almost at the end of Johnny's story. If this has touched you, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me in the comments what part of Johnny's confession hit you the hardest. Johnny's eyes moved to the television one last time. His younger self was on screen signing off from another show, waving to the audience with that legendary smile. The applause was thunderous. The love was undeniable. But old Johnny didn't see the applause. He saw the mask, the performance, the lie. Tell my boys something, Johnny whispered, each word costing him strength he didn't have. Tell them I loved them every single day, even when I wasn't there. Even when I chose the show over their baseball games and birthdays. Tell them their father was broken, not cold. Tell them I'm sorry I was better at being Johnny Carson than being their dad. Margaret nodded, holding his hand tighter. I'll tell them. I promise. Johnny's breathing grew shallower. His eyes fluttered. I'm going to see Ricky soon, he said. And for the first time that night, something like peace crossed his face. My boy, I'm going to tell him what I should have said that day. That I loved him more than any Emmy, more than any standing ovation, more than all of it combined. He turned his head toward the television. Young Johnny was taking his final bow, frozen in time, forever young, forever smiling. Old Johnny raised his trembling hand in a weak wave and spoke his final words. Goodbye, Johnny Carson. You were a hell of a performer, but you were a terrible son, a worse father, and you never deserved the love they gave you. I hope John Carey does better on the other side. His hand fell to the bed, his eyes closed. And at 3:47 in the morning on January 23, 2005, while his younger self smiled eternally on television, Johnny Carson took his last breath. The room went silent. The oxygen machine hummed. Young Johnny kept laughing on the screen. But the real Johnny, the one nobody ever knew, was finally at peace. When Johnny's family arrived later that morning, they found a letter on his nightstand. No jokes, no punchlines, just 7 words written in shaking handwriting. I'm sorry I wasn't better. Love. John. For nearly 20 years, Margaret kept that night private. But now, at 78 years old herself, she decided the world needed to hear the truth. Not for gossip, she said, but because Johnny's story is everyone's story. We all wear masks. We all perform. We all hide the parts of ourselves we think aren't good enough, and most of us wait until it's too late to take them off. Johnny Carson made 50 million people laugh every night for 30 years. But he died crying, talking to a television screen, apologizing to his son he would never see again. The tragedy isn't that Johnny Carson died. The tragedy is that John Carey never got to live. He spent his whole life being someone else, chasing approval he would never receive, hiding from a world that would have loved him anyway. You're not a late-night legend. You probably don't have millions of fans. But Johnny's last confession is still meant for you because somewhere along the way, you started performing, too. You created a version of yourself you thought the world wanted, and the real you got buried underneath. Don't wait until your final night to let them meet you. The people who love you deserve the truth before it's too late. Thank you for watching until the end. If Johnny's story moved you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And remember, the world doesn't need your performance, it needs you.